This is 5x5. I'm Simo and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm here to give you your Star Wars Rise of Skywalker review. I'm going to be talking spoilers and non-spoiler territory here, but I'll start off not spoiling anything, and when I get going and get starting to talk about spoiler territory, I will warn you guys ahead of time and I will let you know so you have the option of, clicking out and, going somewhere else if you don't want to have the movie spoiled and ruined for you. But we'll start from there and let's see how this goes. All right, so right off the top, the movie was okay. It wasn't awful, but it wasn't great either. I felt like it had some really great moments, but it didn't work as a full movie for me. Fan service really undermined the movie. It plays a lot like it was written in a Reddit thread, checking off fan wishes, but not really making sense and not really adding to like the mythos or wrapping up the saga itself. There was a lot of backtracking that undermined The Last Jedi too, which didn't really connect to me. I was a big fan of The Last Jedi, sort of backtracking and pretending that what happened in that movie didn't happen, or at least downplaying the parts that didn't appeal to some audiences wasn't really a good strategy for this movie, at least from my perspective. On the other hand, if you hated The Last Jedi and you hated all the choices that movie made, you might really like this movie because it undermines those aspects of that previous movie. So keep that in mind going into the movie. I was actually taken out of the movie thinking there's no point to this. They didn't have a story to tell to start off, and it felt like they were basically making the movie just to wrap up the saga instead of starting with a really great, interesting story that needed to be told, which also happened to wrap up the saga. There's a difference there, and hopefully you guys will understand what I mean when I, make that distinction. I think the most important thing going in to this movie for me was going to be Leia. I was really worried about how they were going to handle Carrie Fisher's death. Carrie was like my space mom, so if they didn't handle this, I knew I was going to have a hard time with the whole movie. And as it turns out, the Leia moments weren't strong for me. They didn't connect. I could see the visual effects work, and it felt stitched together a lot of the time. I'm going to come back to that later, but I'll point it out there, or here for now. Otherwise, I guess the performances were good. Adam Driver really killed it. Daisy Ridley was fantastic, and that's saying something because they didn't really make it easy for her with some of that dialogue. You'll see what I mean when you get into the movie. Anthony Daniels came back as C-3PO, so he's been in all of the movies, and he stole most of the scenes he was in. Eunice Suotomo, he's the actor that took over for Peter Mayhew as Chewbacca. He was another scene stealer. It's amazing what you can do in that big bodysuit, and the physicality of him really cleaned up those scenes. Billy D. Williams, famously, he came back to play Lando. He was great to see. Kelly Marie Tran, aka Rose Tico, she was one of the victims of The Last Jedi. So the racist trolls will be happy, but yeah, she got very little screen time. Most of the new characters were all great. Actually, I can't really think of any that I didn't enjoy, but they weren't really needed this late in the franchise, so that screen time could have been used on the existing characters that were already in the franchise. Alright, so moving into spoiler territory now, guys. This is your spoiler warning, so click away if you don't want to have the movie ruined for you. We're going to be ruining the movie going forward. Right away, the scroll tells us that there's a time jump, and this has to be the most awkward scroll ever, by the way. It tells you Palpatine is back, and the audience is just supposed to go along with it. In that time difference, Rey and Kylo haven't gotten used to their Force Time episodes, or blocked it, or strengthened it, or anything. They're just as shocked by it when it happens as they were in The Last Jedi, so it doesn't really make sense why they haven't sorted that out, but just that's a side note, I guess. You'd think something that important would have been explored sooner, but... So Palpatine is back. The scroll tells us Palpatine is back, and right off the top, it feels forced in, and no pun. And I feel like that's a mistake. Apparently, Palpatine was also bridging Ben and Rey in The Last Jedi. That's what was actually connecting the two of them, and at least it's sort of said in one of the scenes. And in Palpatine's opening scene, he tells Kylo to kill Rey and warns her she's not who he thinks she is. But later in the climax scene, Palpatine wants to inhabit Rey's body. So I feel like this is a really good example of this movie really doesn't know what it wants to do. This kind of evidence that they didn't have a story. They didn't work any of that out. Because Palpatine, remember, Palpatine is a guy that plotted the downfall of the Republic for decades. I'm pretty sure that his master plan isn't going to be like, hey, I'm going to inhabit my granddaughter's body and then, oh yeah, I'll tell everybody to kill her. Wait, so what if they actually are good at their job and they kill her and then I don't have a body to inhabit? I don't know. It's just a poorly thought out plan. He's a more competent villain than that, so I think he's capable of doing a better plan. So I don't know. The only possible option left is that they just really didn't think it through from a writing perspective. I guess getting right to Carrie Fisher, she's heartbreaking to see on screen. Like I said earlier, she's like my space mom, so I had a lot riding on this part of the movie. I'm really looking forward to this. Anyhow, unfortunately, I loved the character arc of Leia, but the execution it didn't work for me. There were awkward scenes with her back to the camera when you'd naturally expect her to be in the scene, and she'd be unnecessarily quiet when she'd be more like when the character would be more vocal and more involved in a conversation. So it felt forced. There's even a scene in the cave where she's sort of low lit, and I could swear Carrie's face was superimposed onto a body double and like badly. It just felt really forced, and it took me right out of the movie, to be honest, in most of her scenes. I would have preferred they used stand-ins and full CGI to just wrap up Leia's arc better than the stitching of the scenes together. I really loved that Leia was Rey's master and training her. That part of her arc that felt so right. I loved that. But having Leia inexplicably get weak later in the story and weak enough to die was, again, left field, very forced. All of a sudden, wait, why is she sick? But I think the movie kind of subconsciously plays on the fact that the audience is aware that the actress has passed away, so it doesn't do the legwork to explain how all of a sudden her health has degraded to the point where this one next action will lead to her death, because she's in theory, enough time has passed, she's healed from the events of The Last Jedi, so she wouldn't be in any sort of compromised health position at this point. But that's not the case, apparently. And then, of course, Leia reaches out later in the battle between Kylo and Rey at the Death Star's ruins. Leia reaches out to Kylo to distract him, and that saves Rey. That act is what causes Leia to pass away and causes her death. But like I said, it still feels forced. Moving right along, apparently there's a traitor in the First Order. Ooh, shocker. When they announced that, one of the characters announces it in dialogue, and you're just like, really? Okay. It felt really like, hey, this has been done like a lot. So as soon as they announced that, my first thought was, oh, it's Hux, right? It's obviously Hux. It turned out to be Hux, of course, right? But I guess they wanted to wrap up Hux's arc, really. All right, the next part that jumps out to me is really the quest to Exegol. This was another weird choice for me. They could have easily put in Malachor or Moraband, which is the canon Sith homeworld, and just give fans that bone, but they didn't. The quest itself, it was fine for me. I don't really have any strong feelings about that part of the movie. Aside from that, it was an opportunity to sort of richen the lore and connect back to canon, but it was a missed opportunity. I heard or read somewhere that for the first time in all of the movies that the Lucasfilm story group wasn't involved in making this movie, and normally their job is to help the writers connect all of the points of the movie, the plot points of the movie, to make sure that they're not making any continuity errors, or to make sure that they're making connections to in-universe events, people's names, places, and all that properly. This is a good example of where that was another missed opportunity, where the story group would have probably been involved in that situation, but because they weren't in this movie, they weren't involved in that situation. Going into the quest itself, our heroes eventually encounter a giant snake, and Rey has a chance to heal it, and that was a little weird. I like the scene because I like that narratively they're showing heroes, this is me being super lib, but they're showing heroes seeing wildlife life as being more valuable than just something random that has to be slaughtered like in a video game. The force healing itself, I'm not really a big fan of this. I mean, we saw it in The Mandalorian. The child is able to do it, and it's been in the extended universe of Star Wars lore for a long time. But it just seems like a cheap sort of gimmick to me when I see it in the movies itself and in canon. It makes your characters unnecessarily OP, and we start talking about power creep then, because if our best Jedi warriors out there can just heal themselves anytime they get hurt, well, they're going to be pretty hard to kill. I mean, so that's my thought on that. The Knights of Ren are still a missed opportunity. They show up, they're basically background characters. They never really get explored. I mean, they show up in some scenes, in cool scenes, but like, what's the point? Nobody talks to them. Nobody like interacts with them other than a couple fights. They're basically just extras. They may as well have just been extras. While they're on that quest after the whole snake part, they encounter, our heroes encounter the Knights of Ren, and Chewbacca gets kidnapped. It looks like he's about to be taken away to a destroyer with a shuttle, and at that point, basically, Rey is put in a position where she has to try and stop the shuttle from leaving the ground and leaving to get to the destroyer. What's a super powerful Jedi like Rey gonna do? She uses the Force to hold the shuttle, and that scene visually, it looks really cool, but instantly, well, what causes the shuttle to blow up is Rey sort of has to force more energy out of herself, and she releases Force lightning like Palpatine, and that instantly reveals Rey's parentage is related to Palpatine. I know I said it earlier, I dropped that earlier, but yeah, so from that moment on, where she destroys the shuttle using Palpatine's sort of signature Force lightning, you pretty much knew what the deal was. We get introduced to a couple other new characters in the franchise, like Babu Frik and General Pride. They're both great characters, but the other characters like Dio, Zori, and Janna they're great characters also, but they're kind of pointless because it's like the last movie of the franchise, and putting them on screen and starting to flesh them out, I mean, it really just takes away from the main characters, and there's already so many characters in this franchise after 42 years, right? So I didn't really appreciate them. You guys might like them, but for me, they just took away from my favorite character screen time. My next thought was really the point of the movie that gets to the Death Star ruins. Those are super cool. The visual team on this, well, it's a Star Wars movie, so the visuals are always great, but the creative team that does like the set design and the conceptual design on this part of the movie, they just took it to the next level. The Death Star ruins look super cool. I can picture a lot of video games going back to that setting to explore it. Daisy's character, Rey, she's walking through the hallways of the ruined Death Star, and it just looks amazing. You see the helmets of the dead stormtroopers laying around, and it looks fantastic. In the same scene, we get to see Kylo and Rey sort of face off against each other again, finally. That was something to watch. It was a great fight. Rey loses the fight here, and she only survives because Leia distracts Kylo. This personally rubbed me the wrong way because it felt like a way to keep anti-Rey complaints down. Like, a lot of fans online have complained that Rey is a Mary Sue. This felt like a bone they were throwing to those haters. Hey, look, Kylo beat her. See, she's not all that powerful after all. It would have made more sense to give them a draw and make them equally matched. I thought that would have been just better. That way they don't compromise any character and they still move the story along forward. At the end of that fight, there's a scene where a memory of Han Solo pops up. He speaks to Ben, well, Kylo Ren, who's kind of giving up his Kylo-ness. And Han really is speaking to Ben and trying to appeal to his humanity and sort of bring him back from the dark side. And this is a fantastic scene. If you've lost a parent, this is going to speak to you. It's a little soul-crushing. I mean, whatever else you think about the movie, this is probably gonna, make you cry a little bit. The acting here is fantastic from both Harrison Ford and Adam Driver. But that said, the scene is great, but it kind of it sticks out in the rest of the movie because I don't know, the rest of the movie kind of has a different context to it, and then this is like this super great emotional character driven scene that you don't really see in the rest of the movie, so it sort of jumps out. Moving right along, the Octo Island scene with Luke and Rey was great. She's gone to the island to regroup, and Luke appears as a Force ghost to her. She's giving up, and he's trying to talk her back, and he basically lets her know that when he did it, it was a mistake for him. I enjoyed this, even though I love The Last Jedi and the direction Rian Johnson took there. I didn't mind Luke admitting here that he had been paralyzed. I felt like it was a good character evolution for even Luke at this point to run and be defeated in The Last Jedi, but then by the end of The Last Jedi, and now as a Force ghost, to be able to, you know, admit he was wrong and that he had just been paralyzed by fear. So this was kind of a really nice wrap up to his character arc also. There's a fleet battle scene kind of going into the final finale, the final climax of the movie. It didn't work. It was way too over the top. The rebellion, the resistance, whatever we're calling them, they were literally riding space horses on the hull, the external hull of spaceships. I needed some explanation why they'd take horses instead of speeders. In like one of the command scenes, the bad guy commander on the command destroyer, he's trying to tell his operators to jam the speeders so that the resistance can't actually use them on the ships, and then the operator just tells them, well, we can't because there are no speeders, and that's when it's revealed that they're using horses. And it was just such a weird forced scene because it felt like they used that as a justification for putting horses on the ship, like after the fact. There's no way that would happen. Why would you bring horses to, you know, fly on the outside of a ship? They wouldn't know that that was even going to happen. Yeah, it didn't work for me. That's all I can really say. The throne room scene was great visually. Seeing Palpatine in the condition that he was super cool, and Ian McDiarmid is amazing and fun to watch as Palpatine. Still, even after all these years and all these movies. He looked great, he sounded great. The dialogue was really inconsistent though. As soon as Rey arrives, he explains he didn't want her dead and wanted her alive the whole time so that he could take over her body, and okay, sure. Well, I guess it's a good thing that everyone he told to kill her for the past 2 hours and the last few days like sucked, right? Sure, if they were any good at their job and they actually killed her, his plan would really be ruined, right? To me, that just points to the writing really being rushed and unplanned. The character of Palpatine it just really feels like he was added in later without any reason in mind other than nostalgia. He also came with some Sith acolytes. They're kind of a head scratcher too. It's the Sith homeworld, so maybe there's a few of them, plus an armada of destroyers staffed with a crew, each of them with crew, just seems too much. It doesn't really feel like it's very believable. All right, so while Palpatine and Rey are sort of doing the banter with each other for the fight, it gets a little crazy. They do this whole, all the spirits are inside me and inside you and us, and I don't know, that whole thing is just really out of place. It looked like J.J. Abrams had really done a binge of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and he was trying to make both Palpatine and Rey like the Jedi and Sith equivalent of the dark and light avatars or something. It didn't make sense because there's nothing in canon that suggests any past forced consciousness, either dark or light, is any kind of, I don't know, any kind of avatar. It doesn't get inherited into a new body or anything like that. In fact, all of the canon really points away from that. They have to study to even maintain their consciousness after they pass away. So all of a sudden, having all these voices talk to them and whatever, and oh, you know, they're the embodiments of these past characters. It doesn't make any sense at all. Sure, it's cool, and it was cool when the Avatar did it, but it's not cool in Star Wars. And definitely not in this scene without any sort of groundwork laying for that at all. Going into the end of that fight, Reylo, I know they're a thing. They get together, basically. It wasn't really earned for me. Their Force connection doesn't make sense. They tried to... I was right in my predictions. They tried to make sense of their connection and they called it a Force diadem, and it just seemed like, you know, they were backtracking, trying to make it a thing. To me, I see that more as evidence that they wanted them to be twins originally, but changed course at some point in the development process, and then they painted themselves into a corner, and so they were looking at ways to not have to rewrite other parts of the story and whatever, so they looked for another relationship, and eventually we're like, oh yeah, okay, we'll just make her the granddaughter of Palpatine and we'll call them a diadem and we'll call it a day, right? That's what it felt like for me anyhow. This whole thing would have been better paid off without them kissing at the end also. Even a hug would have been better, I think. Ben passing into the Force also wasn't earned since he wasn't trained as a Jedi. You know, even though he was redeemed, and there's another thing I was right about, he was redeemed. Yes, folks, he switched side and fought alongside Rey against Palpatine. So he died on the right side of the fight, but that's not enough to pass into the Force like a Jedi, that the way that Obi-Wan and the way that Yoda did. And moving on to Finn. Finn being Force sensitive is fine. J.J. Abrams confirmed after the movie came out that Finn's admission is actually that he's Force sensitive. Finn being Force sensitive is fine. J.J. Abrams confirmed this after the movie came out. But I think if the creative team has to confirm stuff like this after the fact, there's a mistake that, you know, got made along the way. There shouldn't be any lingering questions like that in the movie. They set up the movie and literally left it unanswered. It's like the final chapter of a 42-year-long story, and you can't assume that anyone's gonna watch another one of these movies. I mean, they will, but you shouldn't be assuming your audience, right? You can't set up a storyline and continually reference it back throughout the movie. I think it was played on at least 3 times during the movie, and then not pay it off at the end. It seems like lazy writing to me. I hate saying that. I'm not trying to take shots at the writers, but this feels like a mistake. It should have just not been referenced in the movie, or it should have been paid off, one or the other. Anyhow, I always hoped he'd end up being related to Mace Windu anyhow. I was here for him being Force sensitive. It's just the buildup of him coming out is a bit extra, but you know, the clues were there. I've seen some fans upset because it suggests that Finn only broke First Order conditioning because of his Force nature, but it makes more sense that way. Otherwise, it would mean that anyone can break free and that the condition isn't really good to begin with, and well, then there wouldn't be a need for heroes or Jedi specifically anyhow, right? Overall, my verdict is that it's a decent movie, but it was kind of milquetoast too. It wasn't anything special. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5 stars. Just to put this out there, the only question left on my mind is, where's Luke's green saber? You tell me in the comments. I guess that wraps it up. That's my thoughts, my spoilery thoughts and review for The Rise of Skywalker. Thanks for watching, everyone. Have a great holiday season. Stay safe, and we'll see everyone soon. Take care.